May 7, 1945, Reims, France. General Dwight D. Eisenhower is sitting at a wooden table in a red brick schoolhouse that serves as SHCF Forward Headquarters. In front of him is a document, the German Instrument of Surrender. He's just watched German officers sign it. The war in Europe is over. Around him, staff officers are shaking hands. Someone is opening champagne. The room smells like cigar smoke and relief. Then the door opens. General Kenneth Strong, Eisenhower's intelligence chief, walks in. He's holding a manila folder marked Urgent, eyes only. His face is pale. He approaches Eisenhower, leans down, and speaks quietly. General, we have a situation with Patton. Eisenhower looks up. What now? Strong hesitates. He's been conducting unauthorized meetings with captured German commanders, discussing cooperation against the Soviets. The room doesn't go silent. No one else hears. But Eisenhower's expression changes. He takes the folder, opens it, and the celebration stops for him. If you want to see how one general's vision almost shattered the alliance that won World War II, make sure you subscribe to WW2 Elite, hit that like button, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on what Patton did. Your support helps us uncover these incredible moments from history. Eisenhower stands, walks into a side office. Strong follows. Eisenhower closes the door, opens the folder fully. Inside are Counterintelligence Corps surveillance reports, dated April 28th through May 5th, 1945, witness statements from U.S. Army translators who were present during meetings between General George S. Patton and multiple captured Wehrmacht officers. The reports are detailed, specific, and damning. According to the translators, Patton asked the German officers about unit strength, about how quickly divisions could be reconstituted, about which commanders would be willing to cooperate in future operations. And the target of those operations wasn't Germany. It was the Soviet Union. One translator's statement includes a direct quote from Patton. The Germans are no longer the enemy. Eisenhower reads it twice. Then he looks at Strong. Ken, tell me this is a misunderstanding. Tell me Patton was conducting standard prisoner debriefs. Strong shakes his head. Sir, the translators are clear. He wasn't debriefing. He was planning. He asked them about Soviet positions, Soviet tactics, and whether German forces could hold a defensive line at the Polish border. Eisenhower sets the folder down. That's impossible. We're still at war with Germany. The surrender was signed 20 minutes ago. Strong's voice is quiet. Not in Patton's mind, sir. According to these reports, he thinks we're already at war with Russia. Eisenhower stares at the reports, at the list of German officers. Patton. 7 names. 7 separate meetings over 9 days. That's not accidental. That's systematic. And Patton did it without authorization, without informing Chef. While American soldiers were still fighting and dying to finish the war against Germany, Patton was already planning the next one. Eisenhower picks up the telephone. Strong assumes he's calling Patton. He's not. He's calling Washington. Because if this becomes public, the Potsdam Conference, scheduled for July, falls apart before it begins, and the war that just ended could start again. The call goes through to the Pentagon, to General George C. Marshall, Chief of Staff of the United States Army. Eisenhower explains the situation, reads portions of the surveillance reports. Marshall listens in silence. Then he says, Ike, you need to control this. Immediately. President Truman is preparing to meet Stalin in 2 months. If word gets out that an American general is negotiating with Germans about fighting Russians, the political consequences are catastrophic. Eisenhower replies, I understand, sir. I'll handle it. Marshall's voice hardens. Handle it how? Patton has been a political liability for 2 years. The slapping incidents, the speeches. Now this. How many times can one general step on a grenade? Eisenhower says, he's the best combat commander we have. Marshall says, then use him or relieve him, but control him, because I can't protect him anymore. The line goes dead. Eisenhower sets the phone down, looks at Strong. Get me Patton, now. May 8th, 1945, morning. Eisenhower places a call to 3rd Army headquarters in Patton answers. His voice is casual, almost cheerful. Morning, Ike. Hell of a day yesterday. Germany's finished. Eisenhower's voice is cold. George, I have intelligence reports in front of me. CIC surveillance. They say you've been meeting with German officers privately, without authorization. There's a pause. Then Patton says, I've been conducting intelligence gathering. That's standard procedure for... Eisenhower cuts him off. Don't lie to me, George. You asked them about reconstituting divisions, about fighting the Russians. I have translator statements. Direct quotes. Longer. Then Patton's tone changes. We should be asking those questions. The Russians are the real threat. Eisenhower leans forward. The Russians are our allies. Germany is our enemy. That's the current reality. Patton's voice rises. For how long? Ike, the Soviets have 200 divisions in Eastern Europe. They're not going home. They're occupying Poland, Czechoslovakia, half of Germany. We're going to have to fight them eventually. Eisenhower says, that's a political decision, not yours to make. Patton replies, so we wait? We wait until they're in Paris? Berlin is already half Soviet. Vienna? Prague. How much of Europe do we hand them before someone asks the obvious question? Eisenhower's voice is firm. George, listen to me carefully. You will cease all unauthorized contact with German military personnel. You will not discuss post-war scenarios without clearance from SHAEPF. And you will remember that we have a chain of command. Do you understand? Patton says, and when Stalin breaks every promise he's made, when Soviet tanks roll west, what do we do then? Eisenhower says, then the President and the Joint Chiefs will decide our response. Not you. Not me. Them. There's silence on the line. Then Patton says, is that an order, sir? Eisenhower's voice is iced. That's an order. Patton hangs up. No acknowledgement. No salute. Just a click. Eisenhower sits holding the phone. Strong is still in the room. He asks quietly, sir, what do we do if he doesn't stop? Eisenhower sets the receiver down slowly. Then I relieve him, and we court-martial the most famous general in a... Patton doesn't stop. He just gets quieter. May 10th, 1945. Patton is alone in his quarters at 3rd Army Headquarters. He opens his personal diary. The entry he writes that night will become one of the most controversial statements of his career. He writes, we've defeated the wrong enemy. We should have kept Germany armed and gone after the real threat, the Soviets. The diary stays private. For now. But Patton's activities don't. He's no longer meeting with German officers directly. Now he's using intermediaries, his staff officers, his intelligence personnel. They meet with the Germans. They ask the questions Patton wants answered, and they report. CIC agents notice. They file reports. The reports reach SHAEF, and the pattern is clear. Still preparing. Still convinced that the war isn't over. May 12, 1945. A reporter from Stars and Stripes, the U.S. military newspaper, interviews Patton about occupation duties. Near the end of the interview, the reporter asks about American-Soviet relations. Patton leans back in his chair. I don't see much future in that relationship. The Soviets and the Western Allies have very different ideas about what Europe should look like. The reporter presses. Do you think cooperation is possible, General? Patton smiles. Anything's possible. But likely? No. The reporter asks, who should America align with then? Patton's smile widens. Anyone who doesn't want to be ruled by Moscow. The reporter writes it all down, takes it back to his editor. The editor reads it again. Then he kills the story. Doesn't print it. Because he knows what it would do. But he makes copies of the interview transcript, sends them up the chain. Within 2 days, the transcript is on Eisenhower's desk. Eisenhower reads the transcript, then he forwards it to Marshall with a note. Patton's political judgment is non-existent. His military genius does not extend to diplomacy. Request guidance. Marshall's reply is blunt. Patton is jeopardizing the alliance. Control him or remove him. May 18th, 1945. Eisenhower sends his deputy, General Walter Bedell Smith, to Bavaria. Smith and Patton have known each other for years. Smith arrives at 3rd Army Headquarters, walks into Patton's office. Patton looks up from a map. Beetle, to what do I owe the pleasure? Smith closes the door, sits down. George, you're going to destroy your career, and maybe the entire alliance. Patton sets down his pencil. The alliance is already dead, Beetle. Stalin is carving up Europe while we smile for the cameras. Smith leans forward. That's not your decision to make. You're a theater commander, not the Secretary of State. Patton says, then who's Truman's? He's been president for 5 weeks. He doesn't understand Stalin. I do. I've seen what the Russians do in the occupied zones. I've seen the terror. Smith's voice is steady. George, Eisenhower is this close to relieving you, and I can't stop. Patton leans back. Maybe he should. Smith stares at him. You'd rather be relieved than follow orders? Patton meets his eyes. I'd rather be right than employed. Smith leaves. Flies back to Reims. Reports to Eisenhower. He believes he's right and everyone else is naive. Eisenhower asks, can we isolate him? Limit his access to prisoners? Smith shakes his head. He's a theater commander. He has access to everything. And his staff is loyal. They won't report him. Eisenhower rubs his face. Then we wait. And hope he doesn't do something that forces my hand. But Patton wasn't just talking anymore. He was actively preparing. And what he did next crossed a line even his defenders couldn't ignore. May 22nd, 1945. Patton holds a press conference at 3rd Army headquarters. It's supposed to be about demobilization and occupation policy. Reporters from American, British, and French newspapers attend. The conference starts normally. Questions about troop movements, supply lines. Then a British reporter asks, General Patton, what's your assessment of Soviet intentions in Eastern Europe? Patton doesn't hesitate. The Soviets are barbaric. They're Mongols. The idea that we can work with them long-term is fantasy. Another reporter asks, are you saying America should prepare for conflict with the Soviet Union? Patton doesn't back down. I'm saying we should be realistic about who they are and what they want. A third reporter, and what do they want, General? Patton looks directly at the camera. Everything. The conference ends minutes later, but the damage is done. The quotes spread. British newspapers print them. French papers pick them up. Soviet newspapers respond with outrage, calling Patton a warmonger. Stalin's foreign minister Vyacheslav Molotov contacts the U.S. State Department demanding an explanation, and President Truman sends a direct cable to Eisenhower. Control your general. Immediately. By late May, the situation had escalated beyond Eisenhower's ability to contain it quietly. The Pentagon was involved. The White House was involved. And Stalin was asking questions. Eisenhower had one option left: confront Patton directly and either bring him into line or relieve him. But before Eisenhower could act, intelligence reports arrived that changed everything. May 25, 1945. A CIC surveillance team files an urgent report. Patton has met face-to-face with a high-ranking former Wehrmacht officer. Not a prisoner in custody. An officer who had been released under. The meeting took place at a private estate outside Munich. No official no American military police present. Only Patton's personal aide. The German officer's identity: a former chief of staff to a Wehrmacht general who had died in the final days of the war. The meeting lasted over an hour, and according to the CIC agents who observed from a distance, the conversation was detailed, specific. The CIC report includes fragments overheard by an agent who spoke German. Patton asked, if you had 30 divisions and American air support, could you hold a defensive line against the Soviets at the Polish border? The German officer answered, yes, if we moved quickly. Patton: how quickly? The officer: 3 months. Perhaps less if the troops are motivated. When Eisenhower reads the report, he doesn't react immediately. He walks to the window, looks out at the French countryside. Strong is in the room. He asks, Sir, what do you want to do? Eisenhower says quietly, I want to know if George has lost his mind, or if he's just decided the chain of command doesn't apply to him. Strong says the Soviets know. NKVD has sources in Bavaria. They're filing reports claiming an American general is negotiating with fascists. Eisenhower turns. Get me a plane. I'm going to Bavaria, and I'm ending this. Marshall sends a secure cable to Eisenhower. If this meeting is confirmed, Patton must be relieved immediately. We cannot have a theater commander negotiating unauthorized military alliances. Eisenhower replies, I'm confirming details now, but George isn't denying it. He thinks he's preparing us for the inevitable. Meanwhile, Churchill sends a private note to Truman. Your general may be right about the Soviets, but he's wrong about the timing. We're not ready for that confrontation, and I pray we never are. Even Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov weighs in a conversation with his staff, later recorded in his memoirs. Zhukov says, the Americans have a general who wants to keep fighting. Good. Let him try. We'll bury him in Poland. Patton's unauthorized campaign has achieved something unintended. He's forced the Allies to confront a question they've been avoiding. What happens after Germany? The alliance with Stalin was built on a common enemy. Now that enemy is defeated, and the cracks are showing. But Patton's methods? Unauthorized meetings, public provocations, insubordination have made honest strategic conversation impossible. Instead of planning, There's panic. Instead of assessment, there's damage control. Patton wanted to prepare America for the Cold War. What he's done instead is nearly start it 5 years early. May 28, 1945. Eisenhower lands in Bavaria. He drives directly to Third Army headquarters, doesn't announce his arrival, walks into Patton's office. Patton is standing over a map table. He looks up. Ike, didn't know you were coming. Eisenhower closes the door. Clear the room. Patton's aides leave. The two generals are alone. Eisenhower doesn't sit. George, what the hell are you doing? Preparing for the war you're pretending won't happen. Eisenhower's voice is sharp. You're preparing for a court-martial. Patton doesn't flinch. Maybe. But in 5 years, when Soviet tanks roll into West Germany, you'll remember this conversation, and you'll wish you'd listened. Eisenhower steps closer. I've defended you for 3 years, George. The slapping incidents in Sicily, the press disasters, the speeches that nearly got you sent home. Every single time, I put my career on the line to protect you. And every single time, you make it harder. Patton's voice is calm. I'm not asking you to defend me, Ike. I'm asking you to listen. Eisenhower says, I am listening. And what I hear is a general who thinks he's smarter than the president, the Joint Chiefs, and the entire State Department combined. Patton replies, I don't think I'm smarter. I think I'm honest. The Soviets are not our friends. They're not our partners. They're our next enemy. And we're pretending otherwise because it's politically convenient. Eisenhower stares at him. Then he says something Patton doesn't expect. You're right. Patton stops, looks at him. Eisenhower continues. You're right about the Soviets. You're right that this alliance won't last. You're probably right that we'll regret half the promises we're making to Stalin, but you're wrong about your role in this. You're a general, George, not a statesman, not a politician. You don't get to decide when America goes to war. That's not your job. Patton's voice rises. So I just follow orders, even when they're wrong? Eisenhower's voice is steel. Yes, that's exactly what you do, because that's what soldiers do. Eisenhower steps back, looks at Patton, and delivers the line that will define their final confrontation. George, you're the best combat commander I've ever seen. You have instincts on a battlefield that no one else in this army can match. But you're politically naive. You think war is about killing the enemy? It's not. War is about serving your country, and right now, your country needs you to shut up and follow orders. If you can't do that, I'll relieve you today, and history will remember you as the general who was right, but couldn't be trusted. The room is silent. Patton doesn't respond immediately. Then he says quietly, Is that all, sir? Eisenhower nods. That's all. Do we understand each other? Patton's voice is flat. Yes, sir. Eisenhower turns and walks out, doesn't look back. Outside, Strong is waiting. Sir, what happened? Eisenhower says, I told him the truth. Whether he listens is up to him. This moment wasn't about who was right regarding the Soviets. History would prove Patton correct. The Cold War began within 2 years. The Truman Doctrine, containment, NATO, all of it validated Patton's warnings. But Eisenhower's confrontation was about something deeper. It was about the line between military judgment and political authority. In a democracy, the military doesn't make policy, it executes policy. Patton was a brilliant tactician, maybe the best America ever produced. But tactics aren't and strategy isn't policy. Patton saw the Soviet threat clearly, but his methods, public grandstanding, unauthorized meetings, insubordination, undermined the very cause he wanted to advance. Eisenhower understood what Patton never could. Being right isn't enough. Trust matters. Discipline matters. The chain of command matters. Because without those things, you don't have an army, you have a mob. June 1945. Eisenhower issues Patton a direct written order. Cease all unauthorized contact with former German military personnel, except through official intelligence channels. Cease all public statements regarding Soviet relations without prior approval from Chef. Patton obeys. Barely. He stops meeting with Germans, stops giving inflammatory press conferences, but his resentment is visible. He writes in his diary, Ike doesn't understand, none of them do. We had a chance to stop the Soviets before they consolidated. Now we've lost it. For a few months, things are quiet. Patton commands Third Army in the occupation of Bavaria, and processes refugees, follows orders. But the tension is still there, simmering. October 1945, Patton gives another press conference. This one is about denazification policy. A reporter asks why so many former Nazi party members are still in administrative positions in Bavaria. Patton's answer is disastrous. He says, "The Nazi thing is just like a Democrat-Republican fight back home. Everyone in Germany was a Nazi. It doesn't mean anything." The comment explodes. American newspapers call it an outrage. Jewish organizations demand his removal. Eisenhower has no choice. October 7, 1945, he relieves Patton of command of 3rd Army. Patton is reassigned to command the 15th Army, a paper formation responsible for writing the history of the European campaign. It's a humiliation. Patton knows it. Everyone knows it. But he accepts it because he has no choice. December 9, 1945. Patton is riding in a staff car near Mannheim, Germany. The car is involved in a collision with a U.S. Army truck. Patton suffers a severe spinal injury. He's paralyzed from the neck down. 12 days later, on December 21, 1945, General George S. Patton Jr. dies. He's 60 years old. He never sees the Cold War he predicted, never sees NATO formed, never sees American and Soviet forces stare each other down across the Iron Curtain, but he died before anyone was ready to admit it. Patton's unauthorized meetings with German commanders in May 1945 weren't treason. They were prophecy delivered in the worst possible way. He understood that the alliance with Stalin was temporary, built on necessity, not trust, and he wanted America to prepare. But Patton's fatal flaw was believing that military genius gave him authority beyond his rank. He thought clarity of vision justified insubordination. He thought being right excused breaking the chain of command. And he was wrong. Eisenhower understood something Patton never did. In a democracy, the military serves the civilian government. Always. Even when the civilians are wrong, even when the generals see dangers, the politicians, because the alternative isn't a more effective military, it's a dictatorship. And Eisenhower would never allow that. Years later, in a private conversation recorded by one of his aides, Eisenhower reflected on Patton. He said, "George Patton was the finest battlefield commander I ever knew. He had instincts I couldn't teach, and courage I couldn't measure. But he had no sense of political reality. He thought war was pure, a contest of strength and will. It's not. War is politics by other means. And if you can't navigate politics, you can't win wars. Not really. I relieved George not because he was wrong about the Soviets. He wasn't. I relieved him because he couldn't be trusted to follow orders. And an army that doesn't follow orders isn't an army. It's a mob with guns." By 1947, 2 years after Patton's death, the United States adopted the Truman Doctrine, a formal commitment to contain Soviet expansion. By 1949, NATO was formed, a military alliance designed explicitly to counter the Soviet threat in Europe. By 1950, American forces were fighting Soviet-backed North Korean troops in Korea. Everything Patton predicted in May 1945 came true. The Soviets didn't go home. They didn't honor their promises. They expanded. They threatened. And the West had to respond. Patton saw it all coming, but he never saw it happen because he couldn't wait. He couldn't follow orders. And in the end, being right wasn't. In 1951, General Dwight D. Eisenhower became NATO's first supreme commander. He led the very alliance against the Soviets that Patton had demanded 6 years earlier. But Eisenhower did it with political support, with international cooperation, with discipline, everything Patton lacked. History remembers Patton as one of the greatest combat commanders in American history. Aggressive, fearless, unstoppable on the battlefield. History remembers Eisenhower as a coalition builder, a leader who understood that winning wars requires more than tactics. It requires trust. And the difference between the two men is captured perfectly in that moment in May 1945. A command tent in Bavaria, 2 generals, one warning about the future, and a line that couldn't be crossed. Patton wanted to fight the next war. Eisenhower wanted to prevent it. Both were trying to serve their country, but only one understood how. That's the story of what Eisenhower said when Patton secretly met with German generals in 1945. It's a story about vision and discipline, about being right, about the line between military genius and political authority, and about 2 men who saw the same threat but couldn't agree on how to face it. Thanks for watching WWW2 Elite. If this story moved you, subscribe now so you never miss another deep dive into the decisions that shaped history. Hit that like button, share this video with a fellow history enthusiast, and let us know in the comments. Do you think Patton was right to push for action against the Soviets? Or was Eisenhower right to enforce discipline? We'll see you in the next one.